Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today, I've got a jaw-dropping story that will leave you questioning how far some people will go to abuse their power. Imagine this. An elderly woman, minding her own business, is mistreated by a cop in a shocking turn of events. But here's the twist. Her son is a high-ranking officer in internal affairs. What happens next is truly unbelievable. Stick around, because this story takes a crazy turn, and you'll want to know how justice is served. Trust me, you won't want to miss this one. Let's dive in. Meet Miss Pina Woods, a 76-year-old African-American woman with a heart as big as her hometown of Newton. She's heading to the Star Market on 2040 Commonwealth Avenue, just a short drive from her cozy home, where she's lived most of her life. Pina's seen a lot in her years, and though she's quiet about it, she carries a deep pride in her family, especially her son Trevor. Trevor, a respected officer in law enforcement, has worked hard to build his career, rising through the ranks to become a high-ranking figure in internal affairs. Pina doesn't talk about his work much. She's always been a woman of few words, but anyone who knows her can see how much she respects the job he does, working to make sure justice is served, even when it's difficult. It's this quiet pride in her son's career that has kept her strong and steadfast throughout the years. As she walks to the entrance of the Star Market, the familiar bustle of the neighborhood surrounds her. But today, something is about to happen that will test her belief in the system her son serves. Officer James Harding was the kind of cop you'd cross the street to avoid. Burly, aggressive, and with a short fuse, his presence alone was enough to make people tense up. As he stood outside the Star Market, watching the crowds, it was clear he was looking for trouble. That's when Miss Pina Woods, with her cane in hand, walked into view, unaware that her day was about to take a horrifying turn. Without any warning, Officer Harding approached her, his eyes narrowing as he stepped into her path. Pina, who had always kept to herself, was startled as he grabbed her arm roughly, pulling her toward him. "What do you think you're doing, old woman?" he sneered, his voice dripping with disdain. Pina winced, trying to pull her arm back, but he yanked her harder, his grip tightening. In front of a shocked crowd, he slapped her across the face, the sound echoing down the sidewalk. The people watching froze in horror, unsure of what they were seeing. It wasn't just the brutality. It was the pure, unnecessary aggression in his actions. The crowd gasped, some stepping back, others too stunned to speak. Among the onlookers was a young woman named Amy, who had been walking to the store with her own groceries. She was horrified by what she saw and couldn't just stand there. With shaking hands, she rushed forward, trying to get between Officer Harding and Pina. "Stop! You can't do this!" Amy yelled, her voice trembling. She reached out, attempting to gently pull Harding's hand off Pina, but he shoved her away with a force that sent her stumbling back. The crowd murmured nervously, some people filming the scene on their phones, but no one dared to step in. Amy, though shaken, stood her ground. "She's an elderly woman. You can't just treat her like that," she shouted, her face flushed with a mixture of fear and anger. But Harding only sneered, his eyes blazing with fury. He wasn't used to being challenged, and in that moment, it was clear he didn't care who was watching. His focus was solely on the vulnerable woman in front of him. The crowd was horrified, but no one moved to stop him, until one person would, and they would soon realize just who that would be. Miss Pina Woods stood there, her body trembling with a mixture of shock and pain, her hand still numb from where Officer Harding had grabbed her. Her face stung from the slap, and the crowd's gaze, heavy with disbelief, only made her feel more isolated. She could feel her heart pounding in her chest, but outwardly, she kept her composure. The years of hardship she'd endured in her life had taught her to hold her head high, even when it seemed impossible. But in that moment, as she stood there in front of a crowd, humiliated and hurt, she couldn't help but tremble. Her hands, once steady and sure, now shook uncontrollably as she clutched her cane for support. With a quiet breath, she tried to steady herself, her eyes watering but not from fear. No, it was more a deep sense of helplessness. She wasn't one to speak much, but this was different. The only thing that came out was a soft apology, barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cause trouble." The words felt hollow, a bitter irony as she realized that she was the one being mistreated. And yet here she was, apologizing. It didn't make sense, and it certainly didn't make her feel better. But it was all she could manage, standing there in the face of such senseless aggression. But as the anger began to boil beneath the surface of her calm exterior, Pina's determination began to take over. She wasn't going to let this man break her. Not today. Not in front of the people who were watching. Slowly she reached into her pocket, her fingers still trembling, and pulled out her phone. Her mind was already made up. She was calling her son, Trevor. He was a high-ranking officer in internal affairs, and if there was anyone who could make sure this didn't go any further, it was him. She pressed the numbers into her phone with calm precision, her chest tight as she dialed. As the phone rang, her grip on the cane tightened, her resolve strengthening with each passing second. She might have been physically shaken, but Pina's emotional strength was unwavering. When Trevor picked up, she didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Trevor, it's Mama," she said, her voice steady, but with an undercurrent of raw emotion. "I need you. There's a cop here, and he's hurting me." The words tasted like acid in her mouth, but she didn't falter. She knew that if anyone could handle this, it was her son, and she wasn't going to let Officer Harding think he could get away with it. Not while she still had the strength to fight back. As she waited for Trevor to respond, the crowd around her seemed to fade into the background. Pina's world had shrunk to just her son, her call for help, and the determination to make sure this injustice was righted. When Trevor's phone rang, he was in the middle of a meeting, discussing an ongoing case with his colleagues. But as soon as he saw his mother's name on the screen, a chill ran down his spine. The calm, reassuring voice of his mother was the last thing he expected in a moment like this. Without hesitation, he stepped away from the table, his heart racing as he answered the call. "Trevor, it's Mama," Pina's voice came through, shaky but determined. "I need you. There's a cop here, and he's hurting me." The words hit him like a punch to the gut. His pulse quickened, a cold sense of dread sweeping over him. "Where are you, Mama?" "What's happening?" he demanded, trying to stay calm but failing to hide the growing panic in his voice. She gave him the location of the Star Market, and before she could say another word, Trevor was already moving. He dropped everything: the case, the paperwork, the room full of colleagues. His mind was consumed with one thought. His mother was in danger. He knew he had to get to her, and he had to get there fast. His car keys were already in hand, and within seconds, he was out the door, adrenaline pumping, heart pounding. Time was running out, and every second felt like an eternity. Trevor arrived at the Star Market in a blur, his heart still pounding as he rushed toward the scene. When he saw his mother, standing shaken but resolute, his anger flared. Officer Harding, the same burly cop from before, was still there, eyeing Pina with a smug sense of power. Trevor took a deep breath, forcing himself to remain calm despite the fury building inside him. He stepped forward, his voice steady but full of authority as he addressed Harding. "You're in serious trouble, officer," Trevor said, his gaze unyielding. "I'm Captain Trevor Woods, head of internal affairs. I suggest you start explaining yourself before things get much worse for you." Harding's smug expression faltered for a split second, his defiance flickering as he registered Trevor's identity. He'd heard of the Internal Affairs Unit, knew that being in the head officer's sights was a career-ending move. For a moment, He stood frozen, trying to recover, but it was clear the gravity of the situation had hit him. The crowd that had gathered, the video footage from several phones, and now the unmistakable presence of someone who could destroy his career. Officer Harding suddenly realized just how badly he'd miscalculated. His bravado quickly melted into a nervous unease, as Trevor's calm but firm stance left him with no easy way out. Trevor took one last, steadying breath before pulling out his radio. His voice was calm, but carried the weight of authority as he called for backup. "This is Captain Woods. I need backup at 2040 Commonwealth Avenue. Immediate assistance required. Officer Harding is under arrest for misconduct." The words were simple, but they hit hard. As soon as the call went out, Trevor turned back to Harding, his gaze unwavering. "You're done, officer," he said firmly. "This ends now." Officer Harding's defiance crumbled completely as he realized the full extent of the situation. With the backup arriving shortly, Trevor made the arrest, handcuffing Harding with practiced ease. The crowd, which had been tense and uncertain, began to murmur in relief, their eyes wide as they witnessed justice unfolding before them. As the officers led Harding away, Trevor turned to address the onlookers, his voice resolute. "No one is above the law," he said, his eyes sweeping over the crowd. "Not in this city, not in this country. Accountability is everything. No badge, no title, no position of power should ever allow someone to hurt another person. This is how we ensure justice for all." The crowd nodded, many visibly relieved, some even applauding, as they watched a system of accountability finally take action. Pina, standing safely at Trevor's side, couldn't help but feel a quiet sense of pride for the son she'd raised. The message had been made clear. Justice would always prevail, no matter who stood in its way. Trevor walked over to his mother, his heart still racing, but relieved to see she was unharmed. Gently, he placed a hand on her shoulder, his voice soft with concern. "Mama, are you okay? Did he hurt you?" Pina gave him a small, weary smile, her hands still trembling, but her voice steady. "I'm fine, Trevor. I'm just glad you're here." She looked up at him, her eyes filled with pride, the kind of pride only a mother could feel for her child. "I'm so proud of you, son. You did the right thing." Trevor's chest tightened with emotion as he held her gaze. He didn't need any accolades. Seeing his mother safe and knowing he'd done the right thing was enough. The satisfaction of knowing he had taken a stand for what was right, protecting his mother and ensuring accountability, was more rewarding than anything. As he stood by her side, Trevor realized that today wasn't just about defending his mother. It was about standing up for everyone who deserved respect, for everyone who needed protection from those who abused their power. He knew he'd made the right call, and that was all that mattered. Thanks so much for watching, everyone. I hope you found this story as impactful as I did. It's a powerful reminder of the importance of standing up for what's right and holding those in power accountable. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories like this. I'd love to hear your thoughts, so be sure to leave a comment below, whether it's about this story or any other thoughts you have. Thanks again for tuning in, and I'll see you in the next video.